I'm Andy Orem with O'Reilly. I'm here with Shahid Shah, a speaker at OSCON who is an application developer in the healthcare space and an expert with medical devices. And he has some interesting ideas about the future of medical science based on software, data, and devices. Do you want to give us a vision of how medical science has not changed and how it's going to change very fast, do you think?
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for having me here. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, the kinds of things that I cover these days is that medical science in the last couple hundred years has been pretty static in the sense that the approach to medical science has been we have an idea. That idea we come up with an experiment to say, okay, we're going to try something out. In that experiment, we do a lot of observations, and so we pick a couple of clinical trials with either patients directly or with animals and other things. But ultimately, it's the same as it's been done for a couple of hundred years. You have the experiment, you run it, and you get some data results, you publish a paper around it, et cetera. What we have today is over the next probably 10, 15, 20 years, with the idea that data is moving much more rapidly to us through the use of body-worn sensors, through the use of videos that are all around us, through the use of sensors that are going to be built into our cars called, in-car telehealth. All kinds of sensors are producing data about us. And the next generation of medical science is going to be done on that kind of data instead of having to go and collect data before you do any experiment. So, for example, today, when a researcher goes and gets a grant and says that I want to try something out, some type of science out, the vast majority of the money that they would get for the grant would be on recruiting patients, grabbing data, collecting it, et cetera, and then only a little bit of it, let's say 10%, 20% of $1 million grant, might be on how to analyze that data and come up with what it is that the new medical science was. In the new way, if data is being collected appropriately, patients' data is being made available for proper sharing with clinical environments, et cetera, then people who have ideas around how to improve clinical outcomes, how to improve health, could use existing data. And in $1 million grant now in the future, you could see that 80% of that money, instead of being used for collection and patient recruitment and everything else, could actually be used for analyzing and coming up with new outcomes, new research proposals, et cetera. Instead of just spending most of your time just trying to collect data about patients, you could do new kinds of science much, much faster, because as we know, most of our problems in science are that we don't fail fast enough. It takes us a year to find out something won't work. Well, if we can use data in the right way, using all the data that's made available to us, we might be able to find out something might not work in a month or in a week, and that's called failing fast. So you have both availability of data that reduces cost of collection of data, and then you fail faster, which means you can do new, better science faster than you ever could before.
So the doctors and the patients, I suppose, will buy into this because the patient is collecting the data to improve his or her own health already.
That's exactly right. So there is a world that we can see coming where patients who have certain problems, there are about 15,000 or so disease conditions, and many of those disease conditions have already an active, vibrant online patient community that cares about that disease condition because patients have those diseases. They might get together and say, look, I'm going to get together and I'm going to provide me and all my friends with this particular disease condition's data to you on a regular basis. So I'm going to give you all the data that I collect on myself on a regular basis. You use that to help come up with new drugs, new therapies, new techniques, new behavioral conditioning, et cetera. So yeah, in a world where doctors run everything, this is very tough because they have to think of everything. But in a world in which patients can decide, I want to instigate a new clinical trial. I'm going to go find 10 people like me who can put this data in, find a data scientist to help us find things out, and then inform the physicians and researchers. That will make a lot of science go much faster. Again, failing fast is our most important thing, so that becomes important.
Are there some indications of this starting to happen?
Yeah, I think you're seeing this today with at least the formations of the patient communities themselves. Like if you don't have people who are already connected to each other, like if you and I are both diabetics and we're already connected to each other, now we know that at least you and I can get together and do something that we couldn't do because we weren't connected before. So the online patient communities is what they're called. Having online patient communities with a particular disease condition where they know each other, are working with each other, are willing to share, quote, projects of these kinds of clinical research are already starting to be formed. What's lacking right now is that the, quote, standard or legacy medical community doesn't necessarily give these guys a lot of weight yet. They're afraid of them in certain cases. They don't give them a lot of respect in other cases, but that'll change pretty quickly over time.
And the patient will be able to say, I want you to research this particular thing because this symptom is really bothering me.
That's exactly right.
So the patients have more control over it.
Absolutely. And any time we can take, and that's what has the consumerization of the internet shown businesses, is that the business and the CIO and business as usual isn't in charge anymore. We, as consumers, can direct people to make the right product, customize this, customize that. That same consumerization is now moving into healthcare. So when consumerization comes in healthcare, if we can say that I want a white shirt versus a black shirt, now imagine that I'm saying, no, I don't want that kind of drug, I want this kind of drug. I don't want you to focus on that symptom, I want you to focus on this symptom. That seems a little crazy in today's world, because usually the medical community decides what they're going to focus on. But once you move to the consumerization of healthcare, then patients get to decide what the medical community focuses on.
So will the pharmaceutical company of the future be smaller, be more nimble, be more responsive? What will it be like?
I think you're right. So what we've already seen happen in the last probably 10 to 15 years is most pharmaceutical, what we think is very large pharmaceutical companies are more distribution companies than they are research companies. So we've already seen that many blockbuster drugs that have come out from these small units of R&D shops that have been bought out by pharmaceutical companies to then build something on and distribute drugs with. So we're going to see that happening more and more, where small R&D companies, instead of having to do several $1 billion worth of research, could do so with millions of dollars of research, because that data collection, which is, like I said, very expensive, and the repetition of the clinical trials, if you have a ready-made community willing to give you a trial, you have a ready-made community who's willing to give you input of data, we can imagine that you can fail pretty fast, try out new things pretty quickly, and get to results much faster than we've ever thought before.
Did you have anything else to say on this subject before we close?
No, I think that it's great that you brought together a lot of like-minded people here, especially at OSCON. We'll be covering a lot of this material, and so one of the key areas around data that we have to look at, and one thing that I'll be talking about at my talk, is on medical device integration. So we've got to put a lot more energy and emphasis and attention on the fact that literally gigabytes and gigabytes of data is being lost every day in hospitals today because it's not being captured out of our medical devices, which means that when the patients are the sickest, when we have a lot of data about them, we're capturing a lot of it, we're monitoring them, et cetera, but we don't store it and we don't use it later. So we need to bring the medical community's attention on the fact that gigabytes and gigabytes every minute of every day on everything attached to patients, everything that we collect is kind of like being thrown in the ether. So with that, I'd just like to leave that we need to give some attention there.
Well, all I say is, may we live so long.
Yes, indeed.